Hello everybody, welcome to the first JMC review of 2019, and per tradition, the first review of the year shall be for a Charles Bronson movie.
Charles Bronson.
Goodbye.
And with the first review of last year being for Death Wish 3, I think that makes this year's pick pretty obvious. That's right, Kinjite, Forbidden Subjects.
You dirty bastard. You get pleasure from hurting kids.
You're gonna feel what it's like to be one of those kids.
No, wait. That's not for until later down the line. Today's review is for Death Wish 4, The Crackdown.
He's working to destroy the drug empire. Bronson is unleashed.
Made 2 years after Death Wish 3, undeniably the most explosive and over-the-top of the Death Wish sequels, Death Wish 4 The Crackdown was a little bit of a return to form for the franchise, taking on a little semi-serious tone reminiscent of the original Death Wish, while also continuing the action-themed direction that the series had started going in. Now, as I made clear in my review from last year, Death Wish 3 is my favorite of the Death Wish sequels. It's just such an over-the-top, fun ride. It just goes completely nuts. It has non-stop shooting, stabbing, explosives, fun villains, and a great supporting character played by Ed Lauter.
I owed you that one, dude!
But you can't deny that the series was starting to get really silly.
I tore it out.
Death Wish 4 has Paul Kersey, played once again by the original old-school expendable action star Charles Bronson, back in Los Angeles, the setting of the second movie, taking another apparent hibernation break from his vigilanteism. The film opens in a parking garage where we see some random woman, played by Margaret Howell, making her way to her car, and as she gets ready to leave, we get the feeling she might not be alone.
Run, bitch!
And in a well-done, almost horror movie style, we see these random punks appear. In typical 80s fashion, she isn't able to leave quick enough, and the thugs break the window, drag her out, and because it wouldn't feel like a Death Wish movie without it, the thugs start to try to rape her. But before they can do it, Charles Bronson appears.
Who the fuck are you?
Death.
A little cheesy, but still not a bad introduction.
Please don't! Please!
After killing the last rapist, he turns him over and... Interesting to look into this character's dark psyche, but when you come down to it, this opening doesn't really connect or play into the rest of the film, so... moving on.
Hold on.
He appears to be back to being an architect and also settling down with a new girlfriend. You know this can't end well. This new girlfriend is named Karen Sheldon, a newspaper reporter played by Kay Lenz.
The article you wrote on battered wives, good story?
Yeah, did you really like it? Did it make you angry?
Absolutely.
Are you still coming over for dinner?
And she has a daughter, Erica, played by Dana Barron, aka the original Audrey Griswold.
Is this your design for the new art center?
Yep,
All right, it must be a real charge to look at a building and know you designed it.
it is.
And with these two new characters, Paul has apparently settled into a new comfortable family.
I was just worried about Erica. I feel toward her like she were my own daughter.
Unfortunately, Erica has a drug problem, and while out with her boyfriend Randy, played by Jesse Dobson, she gets what appears to be cocaine from a dealer named Jojo, played by Hector Mercado.
I love that.
Thanks. Hello. Oh my God.
And she ends up ODing.
Alice, come on, we got a shot. Okay. Everybody off? Off? Clear! All right.
Paul Paul and Karen are devastated, and even though it's been years since he's killed anybody, he goes out to find the drug dealer, Jojo.
I'm going to the police and I am going to tell them, read my lips, cops, policemen. So white ass goodbye, my man.
I am a fucking moron.
Leading to a pretty fun death where he ends up falling onto the electrical cords above the local bumper cars and frying to death.
Who can?
And funny enough, this is the only Death Wish movie where the death that motivates him to go after the criminals is not a murder. In her case, it was the OD, and this film kind of has a semi-message to it. Once again, a little reminiscent of the original Death Wish, with the way it talks about drug dealers and drug addiction and the effect it has on children.
A 13-year-old little girl. She was selling herself on the street to support her habit, and one of her customers slashed her throat.
It definitely carries the drug paranoia that was going on in the 80s.
It's the new American way of life, Karen. They already know about it, and they don't care.
If they don't care, we have to make them care.
Although this message isn't dwelled on very long, and it quickly shifts to Paul hunting down the drug dealers of Los Angeles. And this time, he's got a little backing behind him. An apparent newspaper owner named Nathan White, played by John P. Ryan, contacts Paul, lets him know that he knows who he is.
Good evening, Mr. Kersey. Or should I say, Mr. Vigilante.
And says that he wants to hire him to wipe out the drug pushers of Los Angeles, motivated by his own daughter's OD.
My daughter Lisa, she started using cocaine 3 months ago. She died of...
This character, at first, reminds me a little bit of Ed Lauder's character from Death Wish 3. A shady type, but apparently has good intentions, and teams up with Paul Kersey. And with this multi-millionaire backing him up, Paul assembles an arsenal big enough for a mini-army, and goes after the two main drug pushers in LA. Ed Zacharias, played by Perry Lopez, and the Romero brothers, Jack, played by Mike Moroff, and Tony, played by Dan Furrow. Keeping himself in the shadows as much as he can, Paul goes after various men working for both drug empires, causing both organizations to believe the other might be going after them, although Zacharias is a little smarter, realizing that it'd be unlikely that the Romero brothers would cause such a conflict, because while they are semi-rivals, they've been working to keep a peace for the past year or so. And while this is going on, we see two police detectives investigating the various hits on the drug pushers, as well as the apparent vigilante killings.
They did check on the 9mm slug that killed Jojo Ross. Matches the slug found in the body of the mugger shot downtown 2 years ago by the vigilante.
Detective Reiner, played by George Dickerson, aka Sandy Williams' dad from Blue Velvet, and Detective Phil Nozaki, played by Soon Tek Oh, aka the voice of Mulan's dad, as well as playing Chris Farley's sensei in Beverly Hills Ninja. They appear to be reasonably smart cops, not knowing the full truth, but going on what they have, and with what they have, they do figure out quite a bit.
Are you married?
No.
Divorced.
My wife and daughter are dead.
So what do you think? I think we better find out a little bit more about Mr. Paul Kersey.
The various killings of the men who work for Zacharias and the Romero brothers are just spectacular. We get a bombing of an Italian-owned restaurant, where Paul successfully takes out 3 goons.
Bottle of wine on the house.
Hey, not bad.
Hey, don't I know you from someplace?
I talked about how various actors got their start playing minor roles in the Death Wish franchise. One of the men killed in the restaurant bombing scene is played by a young, pre-long hair Danny Trejo.
I know your face. Did you ever live in San Francisco? I know you. I never forget a face.
Oh yeah, Machete got his start getting killed by Charles Bronson. And we get a fun sequence where Kersey takes out one of the dealers, who's also an apparent child pornographer, in the back room of a video store.
I don't make the kids use drugs. It's their choice.
You don't do it, someone else will?
That's right.
How many children have you killed with this shit?
Most of the posters you see in that video store are for other films put out by the film's distribution company, Cannon Films, including Field of Honor and The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. There's also a sequence where Kersey goes to a movie theater that's apparently playing Cannon's Runaway Train to meet with Nathan White, get some intel, and the theater itself is actually the personal screening room that the higher-ups at Cannon would use to watch their movies, you know, before they go out. Gotta cut costs. The best fight sequence in the film is when Kersey takes out the Romero brothers' main hitman, Frank Boggs, played by David Fontero.
Come on out. What the fuck are you doing here?
I was making a sandwich.
Don't move.
And what makes this fight scene so great is Charles Bronson, he gets hit a lot, and Frank, he really lays it into him. It just shows that while he's a great marksman and a pretty reasonable fighter, Kersey is still human, he's not indestructible, and I don't know what to say other than, could you ever see Steven Seagal letting himself get kicked around this much?
Hell no! No!
And the scene ends with an awesome / funny fall.
He's such a jerk. I wish he'd drop dead.
Woo! You know he did.
And we get a great scene where Kersey goes to a fish factory where Zacharias used fish that come in as a way of smuggling the cocaine.
Hey, you!
And he just blows the whole thing to hell.
Yeah! Right on, man!
Detective Nozaki appears to be catching on that Kersey is the one taking out all the drug pushers, but in a little twist, turns out that Nozaki is on Zacharias' payroll.
I think I know who's been giving you trouble.
Does he work for the Romeros?
Not as far as I can tell. He also killed Boggs.
Zacharias tells him to kill Kersey, but Nozaki seems a little conflicted. Like he's corrupt, but he's not that corrupt. So he goes to Kersey and tells him he won't kill him if he tells him who he's working for.
I just want to know who you are working for.
I don't work for anybody. This is my work.
Don't play games with me.
And showing why pulling a gun and trying to threaten Charles Bronson is a foolish move.
It can be very, very nasty if I want to be.
So can I.
After all the hell that's been going on, apparently over only the course of a few days, Zacharias asked the Romeros to meet with him. While Zacharias has a better idea of what's going on, they both come with various men loaded up with machine guns and shotguns.
Somebody wants me to go after you, and you go after me. For what?
Don't listen to that trash. You're the one trying to screw us over.
The meeting appears to be going south anyway.
It's a setup!
And just as Kersey's about to take another shot, he sees that they're all killing each other, so he figures, I'll just let them sort this out. And soon enough, almost everybody appears to be dead except Zacharias' right-hand man, who just chickens out apparently in his limo. And as Zacharias himself is limping from a shot in the leg, Paul comes down and slowly makes his way in the pose that would be used for the film's awesome VHS cover. And I just want to say, these are both good covers. This is not a bad DVD cover. Looks like a pretty awesome action film even if you don't know the story. But this is the superior box cover. And no surprise, because, well, it is an awesome film, but this cover looks great. This was the most successful home video sale for the Cannon Group at the time. The final scene between Ed Zacharias and Paul Kersey is a pretty good dramatic moment. Zacharias, who's pretty much a businessman first, asks why he did all this, and Kersey takes out a picture of Erica.
I don't even know the girl.
I do.
Pretty badass and pretty dramatic death, but there's still about 20 to 30 minutes of movie left. You kind of had an idea that the Nathan White character might turn out to be more shady than he already is, but he seemed pretty genuine in how he acted, particularly when talking about his own kid's death. But when Paul goes to meet with him one last time, he picks up pretty quickly that he's being set up. And when he goes to White's home to confront him...
I'm sorry, sir, but he has a gun. What's the meaning of this? I told you I wanted to see Nathan White. I am Nathan White, and who the hell are you? Who was the man that was in here last week? Oh, there was no one here last week. I've been in Europe for 3 months.
You plagued me!
The guy he's been talking to throughout the film is actually another drug pusher / rival of Ed Zacharias and the Romero brothers.
Are you fucking deaf? I said everything's great. Most of Zacharias' street dealers are ready to work for us. Romero boys are breaking our balls, but don't worry, we'll push them in line.
Sneaky little shit.
And you gotta give John P. Ryan this. He was very convincing. Even though he was a little shady, he was very fucking convincing in his acting, making you believe that, while willing to have people killed, was doing it for the right reasons. But now, we see, he is just as scummy of a cunt as the other pushers were.
How did you let Kersey get away, huh? We made a mistake. Mistake? Go on, get out of here. Go on!
And when this new drug pusher, we never find out his real name, is starting to realize that, yeah, it was not a smart move to try and play and manipulate Charles Bronson. Detective Reiner, having figured out that Nozaki was on to Kersey as the vigilante, goes to Kersey, apparently crazed, he might be drunk, and says he's going to kill him.
You killed a cop, Kersey. My partner.
Your partner was dirty. He worked for Ed Zacharias.
You're lying!
It's unclear if he would have killed him if this hadn't happened, but Paul gets a phone call, and we find out that fake Nathan White has kidnapped Karen, who, at this point, you almost forgot was in the film. I mean, she had some strong scenes in the beginning, but she kind of just disappeared throughout the film until the last 20 minutes. It's a little jarring when you think about it. But anyway, he's kidnapped her, and she pretty much becomes the useless as a ragdoll damsel in distress.
After I waste this maniac, Kersey, maybe I'll let you go. Maybe. Let's go.
I don't know what to say. This character had potential, and then they kind of just fucked up. And feeling he doesn't have time to reason with them, Kersey, in an admittedly laughable moment, knocks Reiner out.
Hello. Put down that phone. Hello.
The movie ends in a pretty well-made, very stylized and gripping finale at a roller rink.
I'll blow her brains out.
And as shots are fired and everybody is blown up, including Zacharias' right-hand man, who turns out was working for fake White. Paul slowly follows them through a fog-filled rink, leading to a one-on-one where Karen tries to get away, and then... he pathetically tries to play to Kersey with reason that he had to, that he had no choice.
I told you. I warned you. I'd kill her.
And then Paul, and it's just him killing one guy, but the way he takes out the villain in this film.
I warned you! Artillery!
See you in Pittsburgh.
It's almost exactly the same way he took out the villain in the last movie. He just blows him up with a grenade, and oh my god, it is so fucking amazing. Just, yeah! Then Detective Reiner appears and orders Kersey to put down his gun. Paul does, but then he starts to walk on and...
God damn it, I'll shoot! Do whatever you have to.
And Reiner doesn't shoot him, just stares at him looking unsure what to think. And then the film kind of ends there. Some people might think this ending's a little abrupt, but I like it. Mainly because it's very different than the other Death Wish endings. The first three films, while there were awful things that happened and Paul Kersey was put through a lot of heartbreak, they always ended on a semi-upbeat note. This is probably the most depressing ending of the Death Wish films, where Kersey is all alone. And he appears lost, like he doesn't know where to go. And this cop who, knows he's the vigilante, doesn't know what to think, because he only killed the bad guys. So this ending feels very ambiguous. If you've seen enough of my reviews, you know I like ambiguous endings if they fit the tone and story, and this one fits it pretty well. It doesn't look like he's getting away. It leaves it open for what happens to him to be continued in another sequel, which it kind of, sort of was in Death Wish 5, but we'll get to that shit show when we do.
You got a problem?
So at the end of the day, when you come down to it, Death Wish 4, The Crackdown, is the most well-made of the Death Wish sequels. My personal favorite of the sequels is still Death Wish 3, but Death Wish 4 is a very good movie, and people who didn't like the second and third films, I feel this is the sequel they would like. The movie is just well-directed, well-written, well-paced, and Charles Bronson gives some of his best acting in certain parts here and really brings the Paul Kersey character down to a more human level than, I guess, the Rambo level he was in the last film, allowing the audience a better chance to connect with him. As for the other cast members of this movie, John P. Ryan, he was great playing apparently one character and then going in a completely different direction. While he might be a little over the top as the bad version of his character, it is a complete shift and really shows that this guy was probably the most complex villain of this series, and this actually was a very complex story, more than the other films. Kay Lenz as Karen Sheldon, she is a lot more compelling than the girlfriend in the last film. Unfortunately, she is just almost forgotten until the finale. Perry Lopez as Ed Zacharias. He has a lot of great charisma. He's a villain you could take seriously, even when he was having some silly moments.
Let's see what you got left in there. Let's go, boss.
The Romero brothers, they don't get as much dimension as Zacharias, but Dan Furrow as Tony Romero, he's a good whiny, weaselly shit. And Mike Moroff, he's just huge and intimidating, and he's got a great bad guy voice. And you might recognize him as the convenience store hold-up guy from RoboCop. Sunteko is Detective Phil Nozaki. He was a good character. Started out as the stereotypical cop who tries to joke but is more annoying, and then showed, he was corrupt, which made him more interesting, and even when he got killed, when he was threatening Kersey, you saw that he was conflicted in his morals, but not enough to turn him back to the side of good. And George Dickerson as Detective Reiner, I thought this was a great character. He almost went south, but he kind of went back to being at heart a good guy. He almost kills Kersey. He almost believes that he murdered his partner in cold blood, but with the evidence he had, it's no surprise he came to that conclusion, but in the end, he turned out, I don't know if all right, but he didn't go completely dark. Dana Barron as Erica. There's not much to her. She appears to be, in her few scenes, a nice kid, but who has a problem. And before I forget, the scene between Paul and Karen and after Erica's funeral is just... it's a great dramatic scene and features Kay Linds's best acting in the film, and once again shows that Paul Kersey is still very human.
I feel so helpless. I want to do something. I don't know what to do.
Only other actor in the film worth mentioning is Robert Axelrod, who plays the Italian bartender at the restaurant where Danny Trejo gets blown up. And just because I find this funny, he would go on to play Zed in the Power Rangers franchise. Looks like everybody, even if they weren't playing a thug, got their start in a Bronson movie.
Yeah! Right on, man!
Are there any flaws in this film? Well, there could be a little more character development, and a few death scenes have a slight bit of ridiculousness, even though they are awesome. Like when Danny Trejo dies, you can kind of tell it's a dummy for a brief moment. And during the big shootout where the Romeros and Zacharias are killed, this one guy gets shot and goes through a car window, and it's pretty clear that guy deliberately leaned into that window. As for the people behind the camera, Michael Winner, the director of the first 3 Death Wish films, did not return for this 4th entry because he was busy working on the film Appointment with Death, and he and Charles Bronson had had a bit of a falling out after Winner inserted some gory shots into Death Wish 3 without telling Bronson first. Instead, Bronson and the Cannon Group brought on director J. Lee Thompson, who, with the exception of a few films, was Charles Bronson's main director throughout the 80s. And working on the screenplay was Gail Morgan Hickman, who, along with J. Lee Thompson, had also worked on Bronson's previous film, Murphy's Law, which for those who don't know was the first movie I ever did a video review for, and is still my personal favorite Charles Bronson movie. So, I'd say it's no surprise that this turned out to be the best made sequel. Gail Morgan Hickman's original story idea for Death Wish 4 involved Kersey reuniting with Jerry Nichols, his girlfriend from the second movie, played by Charles Bronson's real-life wife, Jill Ireland. But Ireland was sadly battling cancer at the time, which would eventually kill her in 1990, so she couldn't do it. He also had an idea for a scenario where Kersey went up against an international terrorist, but even for the Death Wish franchise, and this is taking into account the third film, I think that's a little too big. Hickman also came up with Kersey's motivation being the loss of a surrogate daughter, feeling that it would resonate with him more, reminding him of his own daughter's death. And Hickman apparently was working rigorously at writing the film, sometimes working 12 straight hours a day, and Charles Bronson kept pushing him to do rewrites throughout filming. And with this being a film put out by the Cannon Group, of course, the film's executive producers were Menahem Golan and Yoram Globus. The producers who are also responsible for making stars out of Chuck Norris and Jean-Claude Van Damme. The film's pretty impressive editing was done by Peter Lee Thompson, the son of director J. Lee Thompson. The movie's music score was done by John Bisharad, also returning from Murphy's Law. And showing that this was a family project for people all over, the other film composers were Paul McCullum and Valentin McCullum, the sons of Jill Ireland and stepsons of Charles Bronson himself, who apparently got the kids started in their love of music. The music in this film is very different than the last two. This time we have an almost noir type score, with a bit of traditional 80s adrenaline. And it sounds good, but it's unclear just how much credit should go to these 3 composers, because apparently the music cues were also lifted from other Cannon films such as 10 to Midnight, Missing in Action, and Invasion USA. And with the editing and music, my other favorite filmmaking process, the cinematography, is done by Gideon Porath, who would later do the other Bronson films Messenger of Death and Kinjite Forbidden Subjects. Hey, it's good to have a good familiar group to work with. And while I think that Death Wish 4 is the best made of the Death Wish sequels, it was not a critical hit, and financially, it did not do that well. It had a budget of only $5 million, $4 million of which apparently went to Bronson himself, and the gross was apparently only about $6.8 million. So yeah, not very good. This was at a time where Canon was starting to struggle. In a few short years, the company would just completely die, which is a shame. Because while they didn't put out quality films 100% of the time, Canon almost always put out an entertaining movie, and they have so many just awesome 80s films under their title. And I totally recommend this movie to anybody who loves 80s movies, action movies. Although, I feel just to get the full experience, start with the first Death Wish, and on the 10-star scale, I give this sequel an 8.7 out of 10. I love it very much, and thank you for joining me for the first JMC review of 2019. Hard to believe I'm making videos this long. Hopefully to some of you, I've become your favorite half-a-fag film reviewer to go to, and I love talking about movies. Hope to keep a little bit of the edge, and I will see you soon with the next review.
What are you doing here? I was just using the toilet.